This is a quick video on how to control a door lock actuator for the purpose of letting a brass workpiece get out of the induction coil more easily. And I'm doing it just because I had a subscriber request it. It's in no way related to ZVS. This is a close-up of the door lock actuator that I used in the first video series to open a little trapdoor, which was nothing more than a piece of wood screwed to the bottom side of a board. There's three things to notice here. The first is that there's a giant spark. That's because this is an inductive load. The second is that the direction of the door lock popper depends on the polarity that I connect it with. And the third is that when I release power from this door lock popper, it bounces. Not only is the fact that the door lock popper automatically bounces back when I let go of power to it a problem, but the circuitry to make this happen is a lot more complicated. In a car, the way these things usually work is they've got DP-DT switches that have a momentary off position in between. When the DP-DT switch is closed in one direction, current flows in one direction through the motor that's inside the door lock actuator, and when it's closed in the opposite direction, then current flows in the opposite direction through the door lock actuator. But in our application, we're not dealing with a door lock that's going to get physically stuck and need to get pulled or pushed. So it'll eliminate the hassle of having to do something complicated like this, and also to eliminate that bounce that we get when we put power into the circuit and then just quit supplying power. I take a rubber band and stick it around the actuator. Now, when I supply power, I don't have to supply power in one direction and then the other. Plus, I don't get bounce at the beginning and the end of the pulse that I use to control this thing. So my circuit looks like this. So the movement is a lot better and the circuit is simpler, but I'm still getting a giant spark. And over time, that's going to wear out relay contacts. The spark that we get when we connect one of these door lock actuators to power and then remove it comes from the fact that this door lock actuator is an inductive load. When we put a voltage across an inductor, current builds in that inductor. And then when we take that voltage away by opening up that switch, all the energy stored in the inductor still has to go somewhere. So it's going to arc across those contacts. Fortunately, we can eliminate a lot of that arcing by putting a diode in. The way this works is when the switch is closed, we still build current in that door lock actuator and we make it work. And then when we open that switch, all the energy that was stored in the inductor has a path that it can use so that the current stays in that same direction, and then all the energy just gets burnt up between the inductor coil and the diode. With that diode providing a return path for the current, the energy stored in the inductor doesn't cause that arcing problem. So our relay is going to last a lot longer. Now I should point out that this isn't exactly what we're driving, it's just a representation of it. In reality, that inductor is a motor. Motors have brushes, and they change between which inductor we're driving inside the door lock actuator. So when you connect this circuit, you will still see some high voltage spikes. They just won't be nearly as bad, and they probably won't do anything to decrease the life of your relay. So now that we've covered how to operate one of these door lock actuators without sending so many spikes and arcs to your relay that you blow it out, we just need to talk about how to power it. Now, a microwave control board, the transformers on it are in no way capable of powering a door lock popper unless you get some freakishly large transformer on a control board. For instance, this one puts out all of 230 milliamps. This one uses a switching regulator to provide its power, so we can only guess. The best way to power one of these is with its own power supply, but using something like this isn't always a reasonable option, and frankly it's a lot of extra cost just to operate a door lock popper. So I'll demonstrate another trick you can use to power this thing. Now in the first video series I demonstrated how to rewind a microwave oven transformer in order to power a ZVS. Since we've already got a transformer core, what we can do is just take some Cat5 and wrap an auxiliary winding around that same transformer core. And since the power that we send into our door lock popper doesn't necessarily need to be clean, all we really need to do is run it through a diode in order to rectify it And of course, we'll put the diode across the door lock popper to keep those spikes from going on. Both of these diodes should be rated to be able to handle as much current as that door lock popper draws. And this is how it operates. Now, if the door lock actuator works in exactly the same amount of time every single time, this isn't going to give you any problems. But the downside to doing it this way is that any variance in those opening times is a variance in the annealing time. So to sum things up, the most accurate way to do this that I've discussed so far would be to use the external supply. But if maybe 30 to 50 milliseconds of variance isn't really going to bother your application of induction heating very much, wrapping an auxiliary winding around the transformer is also a viable option. But hopefully that covers any questions you've got about how to operate the trapdoor on one of these devices using a door lock popper, and hopefully it was helpful.